Proverbs 28:3. The wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion. Here's a quote right before our podcast. Excited to introduce our guest for a tribute to Charlie Kirk. Quote, we must teach goodness to our infants. Charlie Kirk.
Mm.
Today I'm joined by a friend of the Culture Matters podcast, Matt McHale.
Hello,
September
Jay.
10th, 2025. Hello, my friend. Um, we were in conversation around a great tragedy of our culture, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And here we are to pay homage to a father, husband, human being.
Yeah,
Matt McHale, thanks for joining me.
absolutely, man. Always my pleasure. And, I've had the pleasure of seeing you a lot in the last few weeks. So it's been good, man. Always good having discussions with you. Always good being on the podcast, and I always love your to see what quotes you're going to open with, and both were great quotes to kick this off. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, I found this library sitting on one of the
Yeah,
shelves. I was told by Dr. Peterson this wasn't a library or a book, but a library.
library. I like that.
You have this flag behind you. It looks familiar. What does that mean to you?
One of the first thing when I see American flag is freedom, and that is um, the overused phrase sometimes, freedom, liberty, justice for all, and that's one of the things where, as much as we've seen as of late, and we know that things that have happened over years or even centuries of or I should say decades, not century, but decades of um, things that have happened. I still believe that that's what that flag stands for. That's what the country stands for, and that's what Charlie Kirk believed as well, and that's something that it's freedom is a very, very hard thing, and I think the longer this has been the country that has had the most freedom in the history of mankind. And when we look at that and look, kind of what has become of some of the things that have happened, the freedom has consequences. The ability to allow people to say what they want, talk about different things and all these other, the different things that we have within the Constitution, and then a lot of these things just come as God-given rights, and this country has allowed it and celebrated it since its inception, and at times that can be frustrating for for people, on both sides of we'll say there's both sides of the aisle, the right and left, although sometimes I think they merge a lot into the same thing, and um, you know, we look at those things. So I think the most important thing is for the individual freedom, for what the inalienable rights that the individual has and what they're allowed to do, and that's something that Charlie talked about a lot, and he talked about it first and foremost from his faith, because he didn't just believe in freedom of speech because it was in the Constitution or that it was there. To him and to me, that is a God given right. That is something that God gave us free will and gave us these things to be able to make choices. And just like freedom, choices have consequences. So when we look at all those things, that's a long answer to what that flag means to me, but really means a lot of things. You can look back at it of of all the people, I wear this necklace. I don't know if I've ever told you about this, but there's the dog tags from my grandfather who was killed in World War II, who's buried over in France, never made it back. And the other ring was passed down from my grandfather to my father to my brother, who was older than me. Unfortunately, lost my brother a while back, and now I have this, to remind me of all those men that came before me. I never knew either one of my grandfathers, but they've had a profound effect on my life. One going over and leaving his family, leaving his wife and 5 children, and going over and fighting for this country, and fighting the true Nazis over in France,
Wow.
and was killed over there and is buried over there. My other grandfather died a few years before I was born, and he started a business that my father and grandfather and myself, my brother, a lot of people in our family worked at. So a business that lasted for a long time and multiple generations worked at. So both of those things, even though I never knew either of them, um, they had a profound effect on my life. And that, when I look at that, I think of that too, and I think of that greatest generation and all the things that came out of it. And again, going back to some of the things that Charlie would espouse, would be that, talking about that, and how that generation believed, and the things that they encouraged. They encouraged the family. They encouraged, all the things that he talked about. So I see all those things when I see the flag, for sure.
How do you think he would interpret this?
Interpret what happened to him, or like what we're talking about
Interpret
now?
this assassination?
I think obviously he would not want to, he would still want to be around with his wife and kids. I think given the choice, but we don't have that choice, So um, I think he would look at it in a way that would be very disappointing in some aspects. Seeing what is coming out, and just the fighting, because this, regardless of what some people want to say, this was a man who very much wanted everyone to have a voice. This was a man who set up a microphone and sat down by himself in front of crowds of people, and a lot of them were there to boo him, yell at him, argue with him. But that's why the other microphone was there, so they would have that voice, and they had the opportunity to do it. Because his one of his most famous quotes, once people stop talking, that's when we have the violence. That's when we have the issues. So he always wanted people to talk. So I think he'd be disappointed to see some of the breakdown of that, and some of that. I think he'd be very encouraged to see a lot of the people coming out and picking up a Bible for the first time, talking about going to church for the first time. I saw one guy and he had a suit, wearing a suit, and he's like, I never wore a suit before. Never had a suit before. He's like, my wife bought this for our anniversary, and it wasn't exactly perfect fitting suit for him, but he looked good in it, and he was proud, and he talked about the effect, the Charlie effect, and talking about how that affected his life, and he's like how they wouldn't be able to afford this growing up, and he's like, now my wife make a little bit of money, um, and we were able to do this, and this is the first suit I ever wore, so to see those, um, for lack of a better term, kids, what we'll call it Charlie's kids, that next generation that's going to come up. He was 31, he was, pretty much a, kid himself. He was just out of his 20s. But when you look at everything he accomplished from 18 when he started, Turning Point, and to 31, and everything that he did, and the people that he affected, and just the what his organization was able to do, um, I think that's his organization will be under his wife will be the one of, if not the biggest political organizations around. I think the fact that unfortunately, him having to die and just, and again, he was out in the public. He was out in the, South Park had just, had him on an episode, and it was funny to watch that episode, and
Huh.
he loved it. He was laughing along with it. And, the Cartman played him. And if you're familiar with South Park, Cartman, he's like, and he would say something and then put the microphone down and pick up a bottle of water. And Charlie even commented, he's like, oh, putting the microphone down. He's like, that's perfect, South Park. He's like, you nailed me, and he even changed his profile on Twitter to that picture for a while.
Huh.
He loved it, man. He had a great sense of humor. He loved it. He understood that a lot of people are not going to agree with him. And that was fine. He wasn't out to get people to agree with him. He was out to tell the truth. He was out and first and foremost, the truth of the gospel. And then also the things that led after that. But that was his most important thing that he would talk about, and he would talk about it a lot. There's the Whatever podcast, if you're familiar with that, and that's a podcast where they'll have on a panel of women to basically yell at them, to like OnlyFans models or different, women or different influencers, whatever it is. And for this one, there was a panel of OnlyFans models or created that type of content. And that clip from the end of that, where he's talking to them, and I could even play it later if you want to,
Yeah,
but
sure.
where he talks very respectful to those women, and just yeah, I can pull it up here, and he just just to hear his voice and to hear him talk to them and hear what the one woman says at the end. So.
Even though we see things very differently. And if you're engaged in the creation of that content, I think God has a better plan for you. I know that might sound preachy and not what you want to hear, but maybe you'll have an encounter with God, and Jesus loves all of you, and he can transform your life. He transformed my life, and every day is a new day, and it's a hopeful, beautiful life ahead of you. And God loves every single one of us. We're all sinners, and Jesus died.
I mean, you've
for us.
definitely been the most respectful one that I've seen.
Well,
or
thank you. That's very,
met.
very kind. And I can tell you, it's not me. If it was me, I'd be yelling and screaming. It's the Holy Spirit. It really is. I know it might sound silly. It might sound cliche, but Jesus has gone to work on my life. And so God bless you guys. Thank you for a great discussion.
Charlie, thank you for coming.
Thank you guys.
So that was, to hear
Wow.
people and how they want to phrase him as this person. He loved people. He was very, very kind, humble person. But he was also very passionate, if I come on here and talk about, and obviously you and I see eye to eye on a lot of stuff. And if I talk about culture matters and I say, hey, Jay, this is great, but I kind of look at things a little different this way. And, you and I could talk about it. If I come on and say, hey, Jay, I think the whole thing about culture is stupid. And I think you're going to be a little more passionate about it. We're going to have a little more, elevated conversation. And obviously we've, there's a lot of clips out there of him having to that level because he was passionate on the things that he believed about, and would do that. But if you were respectful and you wanted to have a conversation and have that, even at the end we was talking and that woman, and they're all, if you ever look at that clip up, you can all see him looking at him. And they're looking at him like, wow, this is this is a very respectful guy. This is, and that one woman even said, like, you're the most respectful. But that whole time he wasn't agreeing with them at all. He was completely disagreeing with the choices they made, the lifestyle, and the things that they were doing. But you can do that and do it respectfully, and the narrative that has been put out there of this, people calling him a Nazi or fascist and everything is utter nonsense. Anyone who takes the time to go and listen to clips and listen to what he's, again, you're not going to agree with every, and I said this to you the other day, Jay, I haven't met one person where I agree with everything that they say. I was, pretty close aligned with things that Charlie believed in. But I know there's other people out there that 100% wouldn't agree with anything. And that's fine. But, and he didn't, that was all he wanted to do was have conversation about that and present it in such a way that if you agree with it, great. If you didn't, great. But we can at least talk about it, and we can understand. And there's things that he has changed his mind on, or has been more open to having conversations around over time too. When he had all those conversations, there was Americans with Disabilities group that he had at one point said, why is that person on with the sign language? We all have closed caption. They don't need to be there or something. Well, he was educated, why some people sign language is their language. And closed caption doesn't always work for them or other things, and just talked about, and someone showed up one of his live things, and they talked about it. And he's like, no, he's like, I understand that. He's like, yes, I've been educated since I made that statement, and I understand why it's different. And that was, and I understand that now. And that, so there's things like that all the time where he would change his mind. There's other things where he would never change his mind. Abortion is murder. Believes that, at conception, that's a human life, and you're not going to kill that baby, just like you're not going to kill a 1-year-old or 2-year-old, 3-year-old baby. To him, it was all the same thing. He wasn't going to change his mind on that. So there's things that he was very steadfast in, and again, that all came from his faith.
Um, how familiar are you with his walk through faith? I was reading that he was a secular libertarian, something to that effect. In the beginning of his journey, he was became more in tune with it. It seemed that he became more in tune with faith because he was looking at culture, not just politics. He was looking at the culture that influences politics. I don't know how familiar you are with his biography. Like you,
I've heard him talk.
it seemed like his faith got stronger.
It definitely did. One of the guys I know, Pastor Gary Hamrick, down in Virginia, was friends with Charlie, and had Charlie come in and speak at his church, and Charlie had him come out and speak at a Turning Point event, and they would do events together at the same time. So obviously, a lot of times when I would listen to that, those especially were geared more towards around his walk and his faith, and how a lot of those things came about, to the point where Charlie and his wife Erica were having dinner with Gary and his wife, and he asked him to bring other pastors into a smaller group before they were going out to speak, the ones that were going to be there, because he wanted to speak to them. And he said, he's like, look, he's like, I consider what I do the second most important thing. I consider what you guys do the most important thing, and for pastors to be out there and speaking about that. And I love, Gary talked about, he's like, look, he wouldn't want the focus of this to be on him. He would want it to be more on his faith, on Jesus, on, understanding these things, because, he's gone. You never know when, you're going to be gone from this earth, and what's going to happen. And he talked about that a lot, but he did, it's one of those things where, you can be around something, you can go to church, you can be, and then from a young age, he did. But I think that's something too, when you grow, Christianity is, a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And that's something where that is the difference between Christianity and a lot of the religions. And I think, like anything else, if it's a relationship you work on, it's something that you over time do that. And he did. You learn more and more, and your walk becomes stronger, and your faith becomes stronger. And you could see that with him very clearly. If you go back and listen to, years ago to just, 6 months ago, the way he would talk about things, the way he present things, that would always be the lead of things. He would always talk about how important that his faith was, and that he, encouraged that for people over anything else.
Wow. Why why has this been so tough?
Depends who you're talking to, but I think for a lot of people, the people that see themselves in Charlie Kirk, um, they're like, well, could that happen to me? Is that something, or if I die tomorrow, will people celebrate my death because of the things I believed in, because of we had a difference of opinion. I know a lot of people. There's people in my immediate family. There's people I friend who do not like Donald Trump at all. Do not like Republicans at all. And listen, I'm not. There would be a lot of other people I would have picked for president before Donald Trump. So. But it's funny because I was having a conversation with my wife about this. And she's like, I really love Charlie. Didn't love that he was so, so closely connected to Trump, because she's not a big fan of Trump. But I said, well, understand something, since when he was able to vote to now, that's the only person he had to support as president. You go back, from when he was only 31. So when he was, the first presidential election, he could vote in, was Trump, and it's been that way ever since. Um, but, but I think that's what, a lot of people, whether they're, conservative, MAGA, anything on that side of the aisle, um, they're like, man, do people really? I think we understood that there was a divider. I think they understood that there was arguments over things, but now to the level of when we saw people celebrating that death. And again, this wasn't the first person. When you look at any, especially anybody who was assassinated, we talked. There's been a lot of talk about JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King. The different people that were assassinated. Um, there was a section of people who celebrated all those people getting killed. Now it's broadcast at the entire world. Now with social media, now with the accessibility of all of this, that's something that one, we see it immediately. We see, and that's something where I hope at some point people look back and say, man, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that, but it's just raw emotion. It's this thing that just comes out right away. And, and then you're posting it on social media. And obviously we've seen people, there's freedom of speech. There's not freedom from consequences, and they're two different things. I was just having this conversation earlier with somebody where, we saw during COVID, people getting, kicked off of platforms, because they said they were spreading misinformation. A lot of that we know now wasn't misinformation, but regardless, now here or there, but they were getting kicked off platforms. I haven't seen anyone kicked off platforms necessarily for, laughing or celebrating the death of Charlie, but we've certainly seen people lose jobs, and we certainly see, because that's a character thing. You talk about culture. How do you want that in your culture? Do you want someone who's going to anybody's death? Celebrate anyone, dying, but dying in that way, being assassinated. Um, you know, if a business owner doesn't want that in their business, I completely understand. I don't want to say people can't say those things and can't do that, um, because again, that's the Constitution. We have that protected. And if Charlie was here, he would. That's one of the things he very much espoused, very much supported, people being able to do that. So I think that's another reason why it's so hard. Again, I go back to that. We have this freedom, but when we see people burning the American flag, or we see people, celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, or doing things that we don't like, and vice versa, Charlie going out there and talking about things that people didn't agree with. That's the tough part of those things. There was a thing misquoted about the gun rights, and when he talked about look, when you have a society that has this freedom and has this many guns, there's going to be that consequence. There's going to be gun deaths in this country. We can't stop that. And people were kind of misquoting him and saying, well, he said people are going to die and he died, like that's not what he meant. He meant that these rights and these freedoms come with a price. And those prices are a lot of times it's a heavy toll that come with them. But in the long run, it's worth it to have these freedoms and for allowing people to have the freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, and the other freedoms go along with the Constitution for sure.
What were your thoughts on him going to the campuses and having the conversations?
It was amazing. I mean, just the fact that he would do, I heard Tucker Carlson, and he's like, man, I had the conversation with him. I'm like, dude, how do you do it? He's like, again, Tucker's older than Charlie is. He's like, man, I don't understand how you get planes and go all over the place and do that. He's like, but he loved it. That's what drove him, and it was so effective to get out and talk to the next generations of this country. A lot of people were saying he was just going to get, to get in arguments with people and get content. And that, that wasn't true. He did it because he wanted to have these conversations. He wanted to talk to these people. Now, of course, as Turning Point, as an organization, you're going to do that. You're going to use social media and you're going to put these out. That was his whole point, to have these conversations and have people hear it. So of course you're going to put it out on social media and do these different things. But when you look at going into the belly of the beast, so to speak, and going on to these college campuses, his whole point was like, this is where you should be sharing ideas. This is where you should be debating ideas. This is where, these things should be talked about and debated and have great conversations around them. If not in institutions of higher learning, where should we have these conversations? So it was amazing, and it's something that will continue. I think what will be amazing that will continue is his wife and his team are going to make sure it continues and do that. You already have some people are coming out talking about like, oh, we'll step in and do it. And I know some people are agreeing with, maybe Ben, Ben said he would do it. And a lot of people are like, I don't want him doing it. Milo Yiannopoulos has said, it was a quote that, maybe I wouldn't put out there, but he's like, hey, you killed the nice guy. Now you got to deal with me again. And if familiar with Milo, he is very, similar views. But, doesn't have that nice guy part to him, doesn't have that, he doesn't hold any, pull any punches, we'll say. But I think, the team at Turning Point will do that. And honestly, Jay, I think there's going to be a whole generation come up behind Charlie Kirk. I think we're gonna find new people that we don't even know of that are out there, 20, 21, 22-year-olds that are going to step into that role. And because of you had such a great quote on that Patrick Bet-David read to start off the PBD podcast. Do you have that quote that you could?
I know the quote. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to give that quote again? Yeah. When
the tyrant.
Go ahead. You give the intelligent one, and I'll give the average guy. I'll give the average guy version of it. So you go ahead first.
When the tyrant dies, his rule ends. When the martyr dies, his reign begins.
I love the quote, and that's something you sent over to Patrick Bet-David, and he started his podcast with that. I will give you the average person like myself who's a Star Wars fan. If you strike me down now, I will only come back stronger.
Wow.
And that's and that is what Obi-Wan said to Darth Vader, and that's what's going to happen. If you strike him down now, he's only going to come back. And he comes back in the people that he inspired, the beliefs that he spread out there through his wife. Erica is amazing. You know, the fact that she was able to do the broadcast and talk about where things were and talk about her husband when she was there with their little girls. His one little girl, when she heard the shots, ran towards her father. Because she was scared. And as a father, that that just kills me. So that's one of those things where you're that team and that the that's you have woken up the lion with and not that they weren't already inspired and had the passion before, but now even more so. I think Erica is going to step up in such a way that it's gonna blow a lot of people away. What she's gonna be able to do. And I just saw a video earlier. I was just kind of looking through some videos and everything, and I'll send it to you later. It doesn't really transfer to play it, for audio, but it's when they first got engaged, and he had her on the show, and just to see her, the camera's on her first, and just to see her looking at him as he walks in, and just the love that she has for him. And she's like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. I can't concentrate with, when I'm looking at you and staring at you. And she's got this big smile on her face. And just, I'm blessed to have a wife like that who has looked at me that way. And so I know what that look is and what that love is. And it's, it's my prayer for everyone to find someone who will look at you the way Erica looked at him that day. So, yeah.
I want to speak to his faith for a second. I think
Yeah.
I have I wonder if him putting himself in those positions to talk and engage with all those people, there's something very profound about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been thinking a lot about, I wonder if there's a connection between him coming closer to God as those crowds grew, as the pressure grew, because when you create a space for another to challenge your beliefs,
Right.
it becomes bigger than you, like to challenge your identity. I would say there's an act of love in the conversation. I think that's why it's so important
Sure.
to me to the show's called Culture Matters. Clearly, this is a cultural conversation.
Yep.
Love also matters too.
Yep.
And like love is that space between where two opposing forces are coming together. What happens next? Is it violence and the end, or is it redemption and renewal? And like so I want to highlight Charlie's whatever started him on that journey. So the pebble at the top of the mountain.
Yep.
Towards the end of his life, I felt like I believe he was becoming a boulder. And I wonder if there's a connection between his secularism at the beginning and just pride of knowing, having an intuition, being clearly intelligent, a lot of energy, confident, competent, willing to, maybe got some early wins to debate. But I wonder if there was a connection as those crowds grew and as the pressure became greater and as he attracted more and more people pure pure belief, pure faith. If he started to lean on, it becomes more than him. It's like
Oh yeah.
now I need, because there's something transcendent, I believe, about two enemies meeting in the middle and having a conversation. So I wrote this down. I want to read it to you.
Yeah.
I have a belief that those that there I'm sorry. I have a belief that there's a connection. Sorry, I can't read my own handwriting. I have a belief that those conversations brought him closer to his faith because um, the identity pressure is so heavy. An individual um, can't burden, and you need love to see people for who they can be, not for who they are. So in a
Mm.
conversation where we're having come on, have we had any of us ever been in an argument with somebody and it's like we both lose ourselves in it?
Yep.
Are we even arguing with one another, or are two opposing ideas fighting for dominance?
Yep.
So like I'm not making an argument for the content as much as I am making an argument for the state of being that his counterparts are inhabiting. Like there was, it takes something to see someone for who they could be. It's like, let me give this person the benefit of the doubt and let's try to have a conversation together. There's something powerful, is it love versus power? So I'm curious your thoughts on that. I wonder if there's a connection between him coming closer to God and the amount of attention and energy and suffering aimed at him, like on both sides. How much attention and energy and intention and pain and suffering, is any individual actually strong enough to handle that level of contempt and suffering and
Mm.
sin and pain, eh, without breaking, without God, without
Right.
having some a deep, you know, alignment to God. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, why did he get closer to a belief in the eternal? Could it have anything to do with the fact that how could someone not become a monster staring into the abyss?
Right.
So I don't have an answer to this.
So,
It's more of a quandary. I've been thinking
yeah.
obviously about Charlie
No,
as an example. Why
it's
don't
it's
people
a
do
great
this
thought.
all the
Yeah.
time?
Right.
And why is it so upsetting that you know, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's a great thought. That you're talking through here, that because of standing in front of those groups, because of having to deal with all of that, you study more, you learn more, and also because of his walk and his relationship with Jesus, he just wanted to learn more as well. So the more you are in the Word and you're reading these scriptures, and they become more alive to you, and you understand that he spoke a lot about grace. He really understood what had happened, where one day you're going to stand in front of God, and he's going to give you a list of all the things that you've done wrong, everywhere where you fell short, and then say, it's okay, my grace is sufficient. I sent Jesus to die for you, so you can't, because we can't earn our way in. And he talked a lot about that. So I think the more he had to speak about these things, and the more he had to talk about that, he did talk about how we're all made in the image and likeness of God, and how God loves everyone regardless of who they are, what they've done. Um,
Mhm.
I tell you right now that his prayer and his wish would be nothing more than for the person who assassinated him to repent and end up in heaven. Might be an awkward conversation the first time they meet, but I think it would be a joyous one. Um, so that those are those things where he knew and he understood that each person is precious in the eyes of God, and that he loves them all, and we all can receive grace, but that's, again, goes back to free will, and that's the person's choice. Whether they decide to accept that gift or not is up to them. And that's, again, that's where all the things that he would do, all the conversations that he would have, led from that, and went, from there's been a lot of talk about him talking about race and different things. A lot of people call him a racist. Couldn't disagree more. But again, people can, once I think anyone who looks into it and understands that will understand what but he talked all the time about, like, forget about race. He's like, I'm done talking about race. I don't want to talk about it. It doesn't matter to God. Everyone's the same. It doesn't, all those things don't matter. It's just something that, we came up with, and, and you can go look up, and it goes a little more detail of these things, but he just, that's, again, all these things, all these different, ways of looking at these things all came through his faith, because he got stronger and stronger every day with that, because of his wife, because of, reading the Bible and the scriptures, and because of wanting to be a better husband, be a better father, be a better friend, be a better leader. All those things, he's like, I can do this through God. So he always leaned back on that, and that's where that came from. And you would have to stand in front of that crowd. It's one thing to be a pastor and stand in front of a church, and you'll hear pastors talk a lot. Well, this week I got to talk about tithing, needing donations from the church, or talk about, hey, listen, if you're living in this way, that could be a problem. But you're talking to people who are willingly coming to your church and want to hear those things, and they're sometimes it's hard for pastors to talk about. He's talking in front of a crowd that's, booing him, spitting on him, cheering, do not agree with him at all, and are there to, basically protest him, saying, we hate you. We don't want you here. Go away. So yeah, you really need to be a man of faith, and conviction to be able to do that in a loving way. You can do, you can do it, Nate, if you just show up and be like, F you, I'm going to do what I want. But he didn't do that. He wanted to show up in a loving way. He wanted to be able to show up in such a way that, he would debate, but not divide, or at least try not to, and you can't control the other person, but he wanted to do it in such a way like, hey, listen, this is why these things are important, and this is why I talk about it. Even, there's a lot of talk about, obviously, trans people right now, and what's going on there. And there's one conversation he had with this trans person, and just did it in such a loving way, where he's like, listen, I want you to be happy in the body you're born in. He's like, I want you to be, this is my prayer for you. This is how God sees you. Again, he didn't agree with that, some of the things that, of taking medication, or a man can't become a woman, and all those things. But again, he didn't do it from a hateful way. He did it from this is not what I believe. And the reason I don't believe this is because of here. And he would go through those things. And again, if you were someone who wanted to have a conversation with him, he would say it in a loving, calm manner. I think it was even, I have a clip I could play if you want to hear that, of that conversation. And it was a very nice back and forth conversation with the two people. So, but a lot of people, didn't agree with that, and that's fine. That's the way he believes. You don't have to agree with it. But don't, he would say, don't force other people to agree, to think the way you think either. Be open to that. And again, all of that, definitely came from his faith, and that's something that he was very vocal of, being in the scriptures and learning those things, as he went on. So, and that was crucial to him to be able to do those things, for sure.
Where do we go from here?
That's a great question. And again, I think that's up to the people. We had a conversation with Tom the other day, and I texted you guys after and said, one of the things we can do is all be mentors to that next generation, to the other people that want to fill a void left by Charlie, or want to kind of step into that, and step into those roles, to be able to do that, But I think, and Charlie always encouraged, it starts locally. It starts, getting involved in local matters, local politics, making a difference where, God planted you where you are, make a difference there. Look around and see, how you can help your community, how you can help people, how you can make a difference to all those things. So I think, being civically minded, but, you know, with a heavenly minded, and even in the Bible, it says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God. We're commanded to make sure that we are civically minded, are following the rules of law, paying our taxes, doing all these things that Jesus talked about that. So but being a part of an organization like Turning Point or something similar, as you believe, or being part of an organization that's complete. If you don't believe that, being part of an organization that's the complete opposite of that. Do that. Just be part of something that's bigger than you, but make sure you're doing it in a way that that is loving, that is coming from that mindset of. And again, for myself and somebody like Charlie, it's coming from our faith, and that's a thing that kind of leads everything. That that's the guide for having to do that. Because if you don't have that, one of my favorite lines from a movie is the movie Rudy, where Rudy Rudiger is trying to get into Notre Dame and has tried over and over and going to community college and working on his grades and doing all those things. And, talking to one of the priests at Notre Dame, and he's like, Rudy, he's like, in all my years of living and this, he's like, I found two things to be true. There is a God, and I am not him. And that is a true statement, and the fact that I know there is a God and I'm not him, that means I can't make my own rules. I can't, there is a set of rules and guidelines that God has laid out for us that we need to follow, and that's why a lot of people push back on Christianity, don't like Christianity. They don't want to follow those laws and do those things. But people think that's freedom of not following something. But when you hear like somebody like Jocko Willink talk about how discipline equals freedom, and having those things and aligning yourself with this is my North Star. These are the things that I follow. If you don't have that absolute truth, if you don't have something to guide you, then you're if you don't believe in something, you're going to fall for anything. So I think that's first and foremost starting there. But being able to take a look around, start with your family. Charlie was big on being the best husband you can be, being the best father you could be. He talked about that often, how he would try to figure out ways he could do those things better, and then being the best leader he could be. And it just kind of went from there. So looking at yourself and making sure that you're trying to be the best version of yourself, and always working to attain being better, a little bit better each day. I think that's the most important thing of where we can go from here.
If you're listening to this podcast, share this with a friend. Matt, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Always my pleasure, Jay.
We will see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast.